Before Rick comes up, let me open us in a word of prayer, and then we'll have Rick dive in. God, we are grateful for your word. We are thankful for your grace in our lives and just how you have given us instruction in your word for how we are to live our lives and order our finances to please you. God, I pray that you would give Rick the wisdom that he needs to be able to communicate this idea of finishing well. And Lord, I pray that just you would prepare our hearts to look to just the future and what the future would hold, knowing that we are going to be held accountable for everything that you've entrusted to us, and we want to be found faithful. So Lord, I pray that you would use Rick in mighty ways to explain your word to us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Please welcome Rick Talcott.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know if you can hear me. Hello? Hello? No, they can't hear me. Well, then I'll have to speak loud. There's a little bit of volume. Well, here's a QR code if you don't have the worksheet. Looks like most of you do. They provided this to me. I'm grateful for that. And we're going to talk about estate planning today. But here's a little bit of a disclaimer. You ready? I'm not a lawyer. I don't practice law, so anything you hear from me up here you should not consider legal advice. I'm not an active CPA, so I'm not giving you any tax advice either. I am an inactive CPA, but that is not why I'm here. When I was 34 years old, my father died, and he had a trust document. And so I was a financial guy, he was a financial guy, but I pulled it out and I said, I don't know what this means. And I took it to my lawyer who did my trust document, and he said, oh, this is full of errors. This is a problem. This trust document will not work. And everything you were hoping to do, is going to have to be corrected. So we went through the correction process, but that gave me a great insight into what these different kind of end-of-life documents are all about. So that's why I did the disclaimer as well, that for some of you, this will be easy. For those of you with any, estate at the time that you die, you should probably get legal advice, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But I also learned this kind of the hard way, too. There was a guy in my men's Bible study class back in actually it was San Clemente before Compass Bible Church started, and then we all moved up to Compass Bible Church in Aliso Viejo, and I was an accountability partner with him. I had breakfast with him once a week. We talked about great spiritual things and kept each other accountable, and then he died, and it was unfortunate. We kind of knew it was coming, and I knew he had a trust document, so I was happy with all of that, but his wife came in my office. The pastor said, you need to go talk to Rick. And she says, I've never paid a bill. I don't know anything about finances. I know that he has a couple pensions, and I know he's got some oil and gas things in Texas and Oklahoma. She goes, but she was a mess. And as you can imagine, when your husband dies, you're emotionally drained. And the last thing you want to work through are the finances. And so I said, Suzanne, we're going to meet once a week at 2 o'clock in my office, and bring me your mail. And so we did that for about a year. Her daughter lived in Austin, Texas, and she was helpful. But we worked through all the things in her trust document. I got her on her own feet, and she did well for a long time. She's now deceased, but it was a pleasure for me to help her. And then I learned all of these things, some of which I'm going to go over with you today. We also had somebody on our staff during COVID that had died, and I knew that he was divorced, and I knew he had a daughter, and it turns out that he died without a will or without a trust document. And I'm here to tell you today that that's a problem. I mean, it was a problem for him, and I'll never forget the day I set the appointment. I said, okay, come into my office at like 2:30, and I get a text that says, so-and-so and her mother are here. I'm going, whoa, I thought I was just meeting with the daughter of this man that died, not the ex-wife. And now I'm wondering, I wonder what this meeting is going to be like. Like, is the ex-wife going to want things? Is the daughter going to want things? And come to find out they didn't have any documentation in place. And the ex-wife really didn't want anything, so that was helpful. But I've walked through some of those as well, which is why I kind of have a passion for this estate planning and end-of-life things. So we're going to look at estate planning, and we're going to talk about trying to plan well. That's the goal of this, is for you to walk away and say, okay, I know a little bit, I know enough that maybe I can plan well for my estate. And what's a great place to start? I always go to the dictionary, right? What does it say about estate planning? And it says, Merriam-Webster, the arranging for the disposition and management of one's estate at death through the use of wills, trusts, insurance policies, and other devices. So that's our general topic today. Chris has done a great job of setting up stewardship obligations. He talked about giving. He talked about budgeting. I've listened to all of them, and he's done a fabulous job of setting the stage now for this one on estate planning. So that's what we're talking about. On October 21st of 2024, in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article that says, I'm way too young for estate planning. Or am I? That's the headline of the article. She says in the article, I thought planning for death or injury was something I wouldn't have to worry about for years. The truth is that anybody over 18 should consider it. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking most of you are over 18. Maybe you're not over 18. How old are you? 15. So you don't have to worry about this. Anybody else under 18? A couple of you here? So you just make sure your parents worry about it. But the conclusion here, which was by Julia Carpenter, she identified herself as a 30-something. And that was the conclusion of her article. In that article, she references what she calls is her mother's blue book. Right? Her mom had all of her estate planning things in a big blue book, and she recommends that everybody have a blue book. So, I recommend that all of you have a blue book, because when you pass, whoever is in charge of your estate, they got to go somewhere. You're going to say, well, Rick, that's a little old-fashioned. Why would I need a blue book? Okay, well, you could have a box, right? And all of those tabs could have things in them. And I'll talk about what should be in some of those tabs. And you could say, Talcott, you're just an old guy. We don't do those anymore. Okay, well, then load them all up into your external hard drive and put them all there. And then Chris is going to say, that's stupid. You should at least put it in the cloud, all right? But if you put it in the cloud or you put it in an external hard drive, you have to let people that need to know that information know where it is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too. I also last year took a look at caring.com, and they did a survey. They hadn't updated this part. They updated another one, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they did a survey of U.S. adults. Caring.com, they're a senior community platform. And they found that 24% of people 18 to 34 had a will. 24%. Where's the rest of you? I mean, that's pretty scary to me that they don't have that. Okay, so these are why you don't engage in this estate planning. You're procrastinating. I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to this. But, you know, I'm busy. It's Thanksgiving. Christmas is coming. I can't do this right now. I can't go through this effort. And you procrastinate and you procrastinate. Or you say, I don't have enough assets. Why would I do estate planning? I have nothing. I rent my place to live. I lease my car. It's just not worth it for me. It's too expensive. I'm here to tell you it's not too expensive. Unless it's complicated. And then you are going to have to pay a little bit of money, but that will be money that is well spent. I don't have anybody to leave assets to, 9%. Well, I got something, but I don't have any kids. That's just the way my life worked. So why would I go through all this? Well, at a minimum, I would have a suggestion of who you could give your estate to. You could give it to Compass Bible Church. And that's not just a commercial for this church. Because, God may move you to another church. He may do something else. But I'm just here to tell you that there's a lot of places that would love to be able to use whatever was in your estate for kingdom purposes. So I don't buy that 9% of people that say, I don't have anybody to leave it to. And then finally, it takes too long, and it's complicated, or inflation and economic reasons. I'm not going to have anything, so why would I worry about it? So they did update it for 2025, and they say about 25% of you have a will. The same, about 24% from the previous year. A little over 10% have a revocable living trust. We're going to talk about that. Some of them said, I have different estate planning document. I have no idea what that is. I do know for some of the super wealthy, they have other mechanisms to handle, their estates. And the honest people said, I don't have any. 55%. Somebody said, I don't know. Well, okay, I guess that's a no too. Or they prefer not to say. So this morning we're going to look at some questions first. We're going to ask ourselves, is estate planning biblical? Is it biblical? So that, I think, is the first fill-in on your worksheet if you want. Is it biblical? And then we're going to say, is it good stewardship? Are you being a good steward with what God has given you in your life? And again, Chris went over how to be a good steward, what God has given you to steward in your life, but we're going to look at that. We're going to look at how to plan well, we hope. We're going to look at the documents involved in that process. We're going to look at some of the processes that you go through. And then I've got some other observations. We're going to talk about beneficiaries a lot. And we're going to look at some passages on beneficiaries. And we're going to see that, the whole idea of estate planning is you die, what happens with your stuff? You have to give it to what we call beneficiaries. They're the ones that are going to inherit what you have. And the Bible's full of examples of an inheritance going to relatives and some inheritance going to non-relatives. So I just want to kind of set the stage there. Let's look at to relatives. So Proverbs 13:22 at the beginning of it, so I say A, says a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. So there, Proverbs, the book of wisdom, says you should leave your inheritance not necessarily to your kids, but maybe to your grandkids, right? Job 42:15, then all of a sudden encompasses daughters and women. And this passage says, and in all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. So this is true where inheritance goes to sons and daughters, not to be excluded. Proverbs 19:14a, house and wealth are inherited from fathers. And then you all know the Luke 15 passage of the prodigal son. What did the prodigal son want? What did he do? He went to his dad and said, give me my inheritance now. Did he spend it well? No. But I'm just telling you, the concept of an inheritance going to a son or a daughter or to grandchildren is a good thing. It's a biblical thing. And so those were examples of them going to relatives. Now we're going to look at an example of not to relatives. So Lamentations 5, verse 2, our inheritance has been turned over to strangers and our homes to foreigners. Now, Jeremiah is lamenting about the overthrow of Israel. But this is true too, that many times you see your inheritance going to strangers or to foreigners. We'll talk a little bit about that too. And then Ecclesiastes 6:2, you can just write the verses down and read them later. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he deserves, yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. It's vanity and it's a grievous evil. They're going to strangers. Ecclesiastes 4:8. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. So some of you out there, you're working hard, you're building your businesses, you're doing things, you're trying to provide for your families, and some of you may not have families, and no one sits back and says, why am I doing this? Why am I trying to create all of this wealth when it ends up with somebody else? All right, if you do have your Bibles, I'd like you to turn them to Luke chapter 13. I'm sorry, chapter 12. And we're going to look at this parable a little bit closer this morning. I know many of you are familiar with this. I don't remember if Chris went over this in any of his past teachings, but I did want to touch on it today. So it speaks, Luke 12, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, which is Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." There we go again. We're talking about inheritance. They want Jesus to enter into this dispute. But he said to them, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" He doesn't want to arbitrate this. He doesn't necessarily want to arbitrate worldly issues. And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." He redirects the readers and the hearers as to what's important in life, and it's not the abundance of your possessions. And he told them a parable saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what should I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for you. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." That's a pretty powerful passage when we think about why we're here and what we're doing and why we're doing it and who we might leave our estate to. You can see, as I did, that there's this family dispute, right? Jesus says, I'm not going to judge that. But he gave two warnings. He said, watch out, don't covet, and don't think an abundance of possession is the end game for all of you. It is not. So we saw the land of the rich man. He scaled up pretty fast. He had a real estate development project that's exciting. He gets to pull permits and build things. He tore down the old stuff. He's got these big barns. He filled them up. And he said, oh, man, I've made it. I've finally made it. This is so good. And did you notice how it was translated into his soul matter? He talked to his soul. And yet God speaks and said, you're a fool. I don't know about you, but I read passages like this, and I don't want to be called a fool. I don't want to be called a fool with how I handle the world's treasures. And it goes on, your life is over. Your plans didn't work. So who's going to inherit your stuff? So why do we plan? We plan because we want to grow in the grace of giving. 2 Corinthians 8:7. Paul challenges us to grow in the grace of giving. Often we want to grow in our study of the Bible. That's why you're here. And you come to this Compass classroom, and you hear Charlie, and you hear Chris, and you hear the other pastors teaching you things more about the Bible, because I want to grow in my knowledge and application of the Bible. I want to grow in my prayer life. I really want to grow in my prayer life. I want to be reliant on Jesus to get me through, difficult times. I want to pray for the salvation of my neighbors and my friends and my coworkers. But Paul reminds you that he would love to see you grow in the grace of giving. We also plan so we can give glory to God and not to ourselves. So that's why we plan. I would also suggest that we plan because we want an orderly process for winding up our affairs. Want an orderly process. Like you want this to go well. Some of you, have been around when it hasn't gone well. And some of that is because we didn't plan well. Because sometimes family relationships, they go sour. Whenever money's involved or possessions, everybody wants it. Maybe not believers, but even believers feel like, well, this should be fair. And the next thing you know, we're not talking to family members. We're not doing things like that. I also want you to plan well because I'd like you to minimize costs, right? Because if you minimize costs, then you can grow in the grace of giving if you have more financial resources available. And I would love for you to minimize your estate taxes. So remember, I'm not a lawyer, but in 2026, the current estate tax exclusion is $15 million. So when I say we're going to save you tax on your estate, and the way this works in the eyes of the IRS is when you die, they add up everything you have, all the values, and the net value. And if it's over $15 million, you don't pay any estate tax. Right? When my dad died, that number was $600,000. And he had an estate that was more than that, so it was worth it to minimize estate taxes. Well, at $15 million for a single person and $30 million for a married person, I'm thinking that most of you don't fall into that category, so I can't help you save any estate taxes because your estates are not worth more than that. Those are big numbers. I also wanted to talk about gift taxes. Many of you know that if you want to give some money to your kids while they're alive, which by the way is a good idea because they need it now, they don't need it 30 years from now when you pass away. You know that there's like a $19,000 limit per person. And if you're married, that you can give 19, your wife can give 19. If they have kids, you could give to your son and your daughter-in-law, and you could give it to their kids. You could still give a lot of money underneath that $19,000 per person. But let's say hypothetically you go over that. And think, oh, I can't go over that. The IRS says no more than $19,000 per person. And I'm here to tell you, if you do go over that, do you know what it does? It reduces the $15 million when you die. So let's say you gave more than the $19,000 per person. Let's say you gave $100,000 more in your lifetime over the gift tax amount. Then if you're single, your current estate tax exclusion would be $14,900,000. And I'm here to say, who cares? So I would say don't worry about the gift tax because the estate taxes are at such a high level, we don't have to worry about it. So number 2, we said orderly process for winding up our affairs. So the first thing you need to do is you need to identify all your assets. Now I'm going to run through these pretty quickly, but we'll get to that in a second. You need to identify all your liabilities. So, you sit down at front of a spreadsheet with your spouse and you say, okay, let's just list everything that we have. And then let's just list all of our liabilities, and the difference between those two, that's what gets distributed to the beneficiaries. Add up all the things you have, all the stuff you have, the values of that. Make sure you include all your liabilities and deduct it from that. And the difference, that goes to your beneficiaries. If you happen to be an executor of somebody's will or a trustee of somebody's trust account, this is what you will do, right? But if you've already done all the work for them, at least told them what you have and what you're invested in, it's going to make their life so much better. Again, I go back to my father's situation. I didn't know what he had. And he died of cancer, and we thought, we're going to beat this. He did come to Christ during that time frame, but we never once sat down and talked about it. And I felt like if he had just given me 1 hour, just 1 hour, I could have done my job a lot better. As it was, I stumbled and I bumbled around. So you're all pretty smart. This is what I'm going to run through really quickly. And if any of these trigger in your mind, these are the things that you should put on your list of assets. Well, everybody has a checking account, right? That's easy. And maybe you have a savings account, and maybe you have cash in your mattress. I don't know where you hide it. At our house, it's in the fridge. If you want to come and visit us, we have a little cash in our fridge, in case the world comes to an end and we need cash to buy something. I don't know why we do that. Maybe you put it in your garage. You may have some investments, right? You may have some brokerage accounts. And that goes in your big blue book, right? We're making a list. I'm urging you to make the list. You may be in a partnership with somebody. You have a written partnership agreement. That partnership agreement should be in your blue book. Maybe you hold some stocks outside of brokerage accounts. My mom bought me 1 share of Disney stock somewhere along the way. And it's not in a brokerage account. It's something that I own. I think it's worth, I don't know, $100 or something today. It's not a big number. But you may have something like that is not in your brokerage account that you want who's ever handling your estate to know about. If you were smart, you had invested in some currencies, like gold 10 years ago. But where is that? Is that in a safe in your house? Is it, where is it? You may have a working interest in an oil and gas operation. How is that documented? Where is my son going to figure all this out? You may have a family-run business that you have an ownership in. You may have digital currencies, like Bitcoin. Bitcoin was up to $125 per Bitcoin a while back. Now it's down to 90 or something. That's another discussion, but you may have that. You may have a life insurance policy. Even if you had a term life insurance policy, you should identify it somewhere because what happens when you die? Does your spouse know where it is? Does your executor know where it is? And they're kind of running in the dark. An insurance company don't comb all the records in Idaho to see who died to see whether they need to pay out anywhere. I mean, you got to know about it and you got to file a claim, and then you will be paid. You may have real property, your primary residence. You may have a second home. Tell me you don't have a timeshare, because that goes on the liability side of your ledger. But you may have some of those. Personal property, in the world of finance, personal property is everything else other than real property. And really, you know the rest of these. Some people, I think safety deposit boxes are not real, but I went to a memorial last week, and they had a safety deposit box. And so those are still out there. You've got trucks, cars, some of you have RVs, jewelry, paintings. You may have paintings. And you may have paintings in your home, and you may have kids, and you may want to decide which painting goes to what kid. And you may put on the back of the painting, oh, this goes to David, this goes to Daniel, this goes to, whatever. But painting should be on your list. Maybe you have a piano or a musical instrument. Maybe you have a loan. Maybe you loaned your neighbor $10,000 to start his company. And you just said, oh, here it is. I trust you. Here's 10 grand. Let me know how it goes. And you don't write it down anywhere. How is your family going to know about that? You may have loaned money to your children, other relatives, to your coworkers, to your neighbors, to your friends. You may have some intellectual property like patents, trademarks that have values. Copyrights, trade secrets, logos, images, books, industrial designs. You may have retirement plans, which I hope you do. I hope you all have retirement plans. Compass Bible Church has a retirement plan for their employees. And back in the day, I tried to convince everybody, like when we hired Ben Blakey, I got to meet with Ben Blakey and said, Ben, you're enrolling in the retirement plan. He goes, yep, I am. And he has now for however many years he's been working. And those are good things. They're called 401ks or 403bs for nonprofits. That goes on your asset side. Some of these are tax deferred, and some of these are Roth. So if your parents have a Roth or you have a Roth and you pass away, the money goes to your heirs, And when they take that money and they start or they get that money, there's no tax on the Roth IRAs. If it's a tax-deferred IRA and you die and you get that, or you get 25% of it or some number, you still pay taxes on it. You've heard the old adage, what are the two things in the world that are certain in life? Death and taxes. And if you have a tax-deferred individual retirement account, that is true. They're still going to get their taxes. You have to, if you inherit an IRA and you're not the spouse, you have 10 years to take that IRA into income in your personal tax returns. You may be fortunate to have a pension plan. Probably not a lot in the pension plan after you die. You may have some annuities. Okay, let's talk about the liability side. You just may have unpaid bills, like a credit card bill. You may have a mortgage. You may have a promissory note because I was smart enough when I loaned you the money, I made you sign a note. Or I borrowed money from you and you made me sign a note. So you may owe money under a promissory note. You may have car payments. You may have student loans. You may have loan guarantees. And so go through that exercise. You know your assets and liabilities better than I do. It should just all go on a list. So let's talk about documents for a minute. So I've headed this up. Must have. These I want you to write down. You must have a written document called the last will and testament. Life gets crazy without that, unless you're under 18. But your parents should have this. I'm going to suggest you should have a revocable living trust, or that you can at least consider that. That's one of the must-have written documents. The third one's called an advanced healthcare directive. You should all have an advanced healthcare directive. You should also consider powers of attorney. Powers of attorney. We're going to talk about all those in a minute. But did everybody get those 4 things? Or shall I linger for a minute? Okay, so those are must-have written documents. Now these are recommended written documents. And the first one I'm calling a letter of instruction. A letter of instruction or personal property directions. And again, we're going to tease all these out in a minute. The second one is income tax returns. You should put somewhere your income tax return. Because when you're executor, when you're trustees trying to figure out your financial life, they may want to look at your tax returns, and they may see some income that they didn't know anything about. And this is the only way they would know about it. So if you can drop your income tax return in, that would be helpful. You should have proof of identity documents, like a copy of your driver's license, a copy of your passport. If your spouse has died, you should get your death certificate. I told you my dad died young. And so when my mom finally passed away, they had a trust agreement. I went up to the bank and I said, okay, I'm the trustee of this revocable living trust. And my mom passed away and I want to open an account under the name of the trust. And I had my mom's death certificate. I'm going, this is good. I've got everything I need. And the banker at Chase said, well, where's your father's death certificate? Well, he had died like 35 years before. I'm like, what? My father's death certificate? I have no idea. Do I have to have that to open a bank account so I can take care of the trust? And she said, you do. Well, fortunately, my dad died in the same county that my mom died, and it was the same county that I lived in. So they told me, just go down to this office, tell them you need a copy of your dad's death certificate, pay $20. It took me an hour because I had to get there, explain it, had to fill out forms, had to pay them, and then I walked away with the death certificate. So if that were to happen in your family and someone has passed away, put that in your blue book. Title and property deeds, with title companies, this is not as important, but if you have the original mortgage or something like that, you should put that in. This is one that you should all have, digital logins and passwords, right? You should write down all your passwords, or you should have a password manager and write down the password for your password manager, and then all your digital logins. You know, how do you get into Chase Bank? How do you get in the Vanguard account? Because if the people that are managing this for you when you're gone have all of that, they can log in as if they were you, and it would be much easier for them to see what you have. If you know what your funeral is going to look like, what you want your funeral to look like, you should write it out. I've been to several funerals lately, and I've heard the surviving spouse say, this is what we wrote out 10 years ago. This is exactly what we wanted in our funeral. We wanted these songs, we wanted these eulogies, we wanted this person to do the family history. It's just helpful. It's helpful. Jesse Beck. Does anybody in this room know Jesse Beck? Yeah, I didn't think you would. There's a Montana Supreme Court ruling in the estate of Jesse L. Beck, and I gave you information if you want to work on that. Jesse died without a will or a trust document. It's actually pretty sad because, I mean, he looked like a Montana Harley Davidson kind of guy, right? Whatever that means, I don't know. Probably shouldn't have said that. Edit that out. But he actually pulled over when there was an accident to help the person that was in the accident. And believe it or not, I think a police car came by, lost control of his car, and killed them both. So he died. He has no will or trust document. His only child, he was divorced, so his child petitions the court to be the personal representative. So if you die without any of this, somebody has to take care of your estate. So the child petitioned the court to be the personal representative. Jesse's brother, Jason, submitted to the court a video from Jesse's cell phone that was recorded 4 days before his death. And I picture him sitting on his Harley, and he took his phone out, and he said this: I, Jesse Beck, give all of my possessions. If anything happens to me whatsoever, I give all of my possessions, everything, to Jason Beck, my brother. And Christina Fontenay, who was probably the ex-wife, does not get one thing, not one thing. Court ruled against him because it was a video. It wasn't written. So a lot of you techie people think you can do everything on your phone. You can't do this on your phone. It has to be a written document. Idaho has the same law. California has the same law. Most every state has the same law. So we can't get around it by doing that. Okay. If you don't have these, or they're unclear, someone has to step in and wrap up your affairs. And that's called intestate succession. And you don't need to write that down, but it's not what you think it is. Because if you die without any of this, who's going to wrap it up? Somebody petitions the court and says, that was my dad, I'm the only son, I want to be assigned the personal representative, and I want to take care of my father's estate. And then a judge will say whether that's true or not. So the court makes the decisions for you. It's called a personal representative, and it may be somebody you never know. You've never known. Think about your family. Some of you come from broken families. Let's say there's 3 kids. 2 of them are tracking with the Lord, and 1 of them isn't. And let's say you even had children, and you didn't give any advice to where your stuff goes. That wayward child may come in and say, I'm the best to care for these kids. I'm the best to manage this. And they get to go before the court like anybody else. And so in California, I say, it's people that don't share your values. I say, Governor Newsom gets to decide who manages your estate. Now, that's a bit of a stretch. But the court is going to pick somebody if you don't. And I'm just saying, I would like you not to do that. So what is the last will and testament? This is like the beginning of almost every last will and testament. You've seen it in the movies. This is the Idaho last will and testament of somebody, which is you, Rick Talcott, the testator. I'm called the testator. I, Rick Talcott, resident in the city of Meridian, county of Ada, state of Idaho, being of sound mind. I'm of sound mind. I'm able to do this. I'm able to enter into this contract. I'm not acting under duress or undue influence, fully understanding the nature and extent of all my property and disposition thereof. Do hereby make, publish, declare the document to be my last will and testament. So this is what I want you to have. Kind of talked about the term testator. You're going to assign an executor. When I die, this is who's going to do this. I'm giving all my stuff away. You have to have a successor too. Like, Chris, if you say I'm going to be your executor, what happens if I'm gone? So you die, I'm the executor, so they always want a successor behind that. Needs to be witnessed, which means when you sign your will, you just have to grab two people, preferably not any family members or beneficiaries, have them over to your house, sit at the kitchen table and say, would you witness my last will and testament? Now, witnesses don't have the right to look at anything. There's a page at the back that says witness, and you just sign a date it to say, I watched them sign this. That's all you need. Wills go through what's called probate, which is another court-ordered process that the court needs to come to the conclusion that the executor did what he was supposed to do. That's called probate. In Idaho, the cost of probate is anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000. That's pretty low. If you have a large estate, that number is going to be a lot higher. If you have a simple, uncontested estate, the lawyers can do it for about $2,000 to $3,000 in the state of Idaho. It could take up to 6 to 8 months. So there are some costs involved. So I want you now to be thinking about, who am I going to name as my executor? Because this is an important decision. You need to identify the children in your last will, and you need to name guardians for your children. I added in pets for the people that love their pets, but you have to name your children and who the guardian is going to be. If you pass away and you don't say who your children go to, the court's going to decide, because someone's going to come up and say, I want to take care of those kids. That's what I want to do. And so I urge you, if nothing else, if you have kids that are still under 18, would you do this? And it gets complicated, right? We had 4 kids. Who's going to take all 4 of my kids? And so we picked somebody in Indiana, and we said, you can have some money out of our estate if you got to buy a bigger house, because you got 5 kids. Now we're going to give you 4. You're going to have 9 kids. We don't know how you're going to do that. And we never use this, right? And hopefully you never have to use this. But in case you do, you're going to need to identify who the beneficiaries are. So who's going to get my stuff? This gets sensitive, right? This gets sensitive. If you have 4 children, or I'll use an example of a guy at church I was talking to a month ago, actually 2 years ago. He had a child that was walking with the Lord and tracking with the Lord and being a great, responsible Christian. He had a son that was exactly the opposite, that blew him off. Wouldn't come to Thanksgiving, wouldn't come to Christmas, said rude and obnoxious things about them all the time, hadn't talked to them in 10 years. And I had mentioned, it'd be good to identify who your beneficiaries are. And I said, I don't know why you would leave your estate to somebody that's anti-Christian. They're not going to use your funds that God gave you. Chris told you in the stewardship, he gives you the ability to make money and to generate wealth. And if all we are is conduits, so the money that comes in, that we serve Christ with how we spend our money, why would you give money to somebody that is never going to use that money to advance the kingdom of God? So that's kind of the heavy thing we need to talk about, because we need to talk about it. All right. Make sense? This friend of mine said, yep, I cut my older son out, and I put the church in, because I know the church will use the funds. Compass Bible Church, Treasure Valley will get put to good use whatever you leave to them, or your favorite missionary that needs some money, or whatever it is. Giving should go first, as Chris said, to the church. We talked about, some of the little things, and then there's legal stuff in this last will and testament. Actually, in Idaho, wills have to go through probate. You have to get a little letter from the lawyers. If your estate's under $100,000, I say no probate, which isn't really true. You have to get a small estate affidavit. I think you can do it for a couple $100 in Idaho because the estate's under 100. So if your estate's under $100,000, way under $100,000, you don't have to go through probate. You can just do whatever the will said to do, and no one's looking over your shoulder to see whether you did it right or you did it wrong. If it's more than $100,000, then you need to go through probate if you have a last will and testament. So the other document I wanted to talk about, or one of many, is this revocable living trust. So a revocable living trust, number one, they don't go through probate. So those probate costs, you don't have to worry about. So I like that. Save you money. They're a little bit more comprehensive than a will. It's a more formal legal document. It uses different terms but the same functions. You're a grantor. If you're a grantor of a revocable living trust, you're the ones that have granted the legal things inside of that trust. There's a trustee that manages it for you. There needs to be successor trustees for when you die and successors to them. And you need to identify the beneficiaries. And then you have to do another little strange thing. You have to vest some of these assets in the name of the trust. So I have a trust, and the trust owns my home. So if you look on my title deed, it's the Talcott Family Living Trust dated December 1988. It's weird, right? But it's on the deed that the trust owns the home. If you have a home and you have a trust, you have to get it properly vested. You have to own it. It has to be recorded. Same thing with bank accounts or brokerage accounts. You want to invest in this or this, and you have a trust. The trust invests in this or this. So a little bit more work on your part. The directions for distributing the net assets, it's the same. Your trustee is going to add up all your assets. It's going to deduct all your liabilities, and whatever's left, they're going to distribute it to the beneficiaries. The trustee has a fiduciary responsibility to do what is in the trust. So if you're thinking, well, okay, I got 3 kids, they're all walking with the Lord. One knows something about finances, the other one doesn't. I'm going to pick this one because I want to do this. There's no leeway, right? There's no leeway in what the trustee can do. They have a fiduciary responsibility to do exactly what you said you want done. I want the church to get 20%. I want the remaining 80% to be split between these 4 people, and whatever you want to say. The trustee comes in, and he has to do that. He or she has to do that. They have a fiduciary responsibility to do that. We talked about how it has to be in writing. You can do the same guardian designations. You do need to get this document notarized. And so it's one extra step, $40 or $50. At Compass Bible Church, Aliso Viejo, we have a notary. I don't know if they have one here yet, but it has to be notarized. There is a cost to that. Remember, it allows for tax planning. If you're over 15 million, you can really go to 30 million. And I talked to you about the gift tax implications. Amendments are easy, right? You can do all this work, and then 3 years later or 5 years later, something changes. You just do a quick amendment. And so you would have to do that in your wills too. You're still going to have last will and testament. Say, Rick, I thought it was either or. No, in the package that you get, they really want you to have what's called a pour-over will. And the pour-over will says, if I forgot to put something in my trust, I really meant it to be there. So even though I forgot about it, like maybe, because your trust document will identify the major assets that you have. And if you just forgot to put something in, then the will says, well, the jewelry in my safety deposit box that I forgot to put on the list, it should be in there. Or maybe you invested in something new, or maybe you bought another house. As long as it's vested correctly, you're fine. But there might be some things that you just forgot, so they want you to do that. The details of your estate remain private. If you have a revocable living trust, this is a private document. The last will and testaments, those are public, because you got to get a judge to say, yep, this is what the will said to do, this is what you do. So if you want it to be private, these generally become irrevocable upon the death of the first to die. If you're a married couple, once you die, you can't make changes to it, at least to half of it if you're doing some tax planning. But just know this is really what you want to do. And you can make changes up to the time that you're still of sound mind and body and can think through these things and make those changes. I'll tell you, you should pay the trustee. Right? Your state of Idaho said that, the trustee's doing a lot of work. If they own real estate, you should pay them. A lot of families say, I'm not going to take any compensation. And then they spend, 20 hours a week for 6 months, and they lost the opportunity to earn money on their own. And you don't go through probate. So there's no probate. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about bank and brokerage accounts. So let's say you have a revocable living trust. You identified the Merrill Lynch account that you have as being in the trust. And then you go to Merrill Lynch and you sign the documents when you open an account. How many have opened an account recently anywhere? Well, you open an account, you fill it out, and you fill it out as you own it. You didn't tell them about the trust. That's a problem, because your revocable living trust said that was supposed to be in it, but it isn't in it. What's Merrill Lynch going to do? They're going to do whatever the beneficiary statement said on the document that you signed when you opened that account. So be careful. Please be careful. Life insurance, your life insurance has a beneficiary designation. If I were to die, who gets the proceeds? Is it your trust, which is not normally done? It can be. It's a little more complicated. But maybe you just want to split it between all of your kids. Or first it goes to your spouse. If your spouse is alive and you have life insurance, your spouse should be the beneficiary. Your employer may have life insurance on you that you don't even know about. You onboarded, you signed all the docs. One of them said, we got $50,000 of life insurance for you. Sign this form. Who's your beneficiary? And you didn't think about it. I want you to think about it, especially if you have a trust. Put it in the name of the trust. Retirement plans are the same way. Make sure the beneficiaries are right in your retirement plans. Those are normally outside of your trust. Okay, why do I need an advanced healthcare directive? Because there may be a point in time that medical direction needs to be given, and you're not capable of giving that. You can't do it. You're in a coma, and you can't give that advice. And your spouse has already died. Who's going to tell the doctor what to do? So the doctors want to know, the hospitals want to know, pharmacies want to know. And really the issue is called a DNR, do not resuscitate, right? If you're in a coma and the medical profession says you're going to be in a coma for a long time, and something were to happen to you, do you want the medical profession to take extraordinary steps to keep you alive? Or do you want to say, I'm going to sign this DNR, do not resuscitate, because I don't want it. At that point, I want to see Jesus. My life's good. So if I'm dying of cancer and I happen to have a heart attack, don't treat me for the heart attack. Let me go. That's why you need something if no one's around to make those decisions. You need somebody around to make those decisions. Hospitals, they have their own forms sometimes. Like you check in and they're like, do you have a DNR? Do you have an advanced healthcare directive? And they're going to say no. And so hospitals have their forms. If you have to go to hospice, you might need it. This is for adults only, okay? If you're not 18, you're not old enough to sign a contract. It wouldn't be legally binding. And maybe some of you have had this in your life before. You take your kid in, they biopsy a mole, he turns 18 before you get the pathology back, you call the doctor, what was it? And they say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. Because your son or daughter's now they're 18. What do you mean you can't talk to me? It's my insurance, I'm paying for it, I brought him into your office. You're not going to tell me? They won't tell you. If you had an advanced care directive, even on an 18-year-old, world that says you can make those decisions for them, that could be helpful. You want to do it for free? Do it for free. I gave you the link in the outline. Go to that website, and you can do an advanced healthcare directive for free. Okay? Let's talk about powers of attorney. 2 types of powers of attorney. A power of attorney basically says, this person can act in my place on all matters. All matters. They can act in place of me. So they could sell your house, they could buy your house, they could buy a car, they could sell a car. They could do everything you can do, a general power of attorney, they can do. There are limited powers of attorney, and they can act in your place, but they're restricted to certain matters. Not everything. They don't want everything. You want to do a free one? Go to the stateofidaho.gov, type in their search box, powers of attorney, and you can do it. They can give you the forms. They can do it right there. In fact, here's a picture of what I downloaded last week. Idaho Statutory Form Power of Attorney. And you can read through that. It's got the same things. I, Rick Talcott, name the following person as my agent, Dave Wood. Here's his address. If he isn't alive, then Lisa Wood's going to do it. And there's her address. Again, we're just saying what's going to happen if I can't do certain things. Real property, tangible personal property, and you're not dead yet. So the will and the revocable living trust isn't in place, but you're just trying to help while this person's still alive. So then you initial all the ones that you want to give in a limited power of attorney, and there's a list, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. But powers of attorney. So let's keep going. Letter of instructions. These are low-value items. This letter of instruction that I encourage you to do, it's not legally binding. It's not like the will or the revocable living trust. And it usually includes like heirlooms or keepsakes or artwork. Some of your artwork may be worth a lot. It may be a certain piece of china or silver or a bowl, maybe sports equipment. Maybe you want your son to have your weight machine in your garage. Maybe you have an ice machine. That's an inside joke. Maybe you've got equipment. Maybe you have farm equipment. I don't know, I'm in Idaho. Furniture, electronics, tools, sewing machine, a quilt, a surfboard. Oh, wait a minute. That's the California presentation. How about your guns or your belt buckles? Like, who's going to get my gun? Right? You should have these, because this could get dicey and have personal relationship problems if you're not careful. And I just kind of made these up, but it's helpful. If you want this to go to this person and that to go to that person, it's not big enough to put in your will or your revocable living trust. So just write out a letter. So I'll get to questions in a minute. Okay, here's a couple other things in my other observations section. Let people know where the documents are physically located. Right? Is it in your safe in your house? Well, where's your safe? If it's on the cloud, how do I get to it? If it's on a drive, how do I get to that? I would highly recommend that you discuss the documents with your beneficiaries. Let them know what you're doing. A friend of mine that cut the older son out, they told him. They said, well, we're all about Christ and the kingdom of God. For all I know, you're going to spend the money on Planned Parenthood or something. I don't know. But you're acting like you hate us, and so I'm telling you now that we cut you out, instead of finding out about it when the will's read or you die, and then they wonder, why was I cut out and everybody else got it? So I would highly recommend that you discuss it with your beneficiaries. I would give them copies. This gets a little dicey because what if you change it? So they got a copy that said this, and then you changed it, and you didn't give them the change. But I think it's really good to have that level of communication. And I would even discuss the composition of your estate with the beneficiaries. Back to me and my dad. If he had told me just one thing, it would have saved me like 40 hours. So tell them what's in it. And we don't like to do that, do we? We always keep the financial stuff like it's right here. But as you get older, I think you should tell them. Also, you should get an appraisal of your assets at the first death. So if you own a home and your spouse dies, get an appraisal. It helps for tax purposes. If you paid $300,000 for your home in Idaho and it's worth $800,000 today and you sell it, what's your gain? $500,000. How much tax do you pay? None. Federal tax. Because the first $500,000 of gain in the current IRS codes, you don't pay tax on it. Let's say it's worth $1 million and you spent $300,000. Now you got $1.2 million of gain and you do pay tax on that. But if a spouse dies in between that and you get it appraised, that becomes your new cost, right? So you paid $300,000, it's worth $800,000, you get an appraisal, now it's worth $800,000 for determining the gain that you might have to pay later. So think about that. Get an appraisal on the first death. Okay, well, what about the wills and the trusts? There's lots of these, by the way. But freewill.com, it's free. They do wills, they do trusts, they do advanced care health directives, they do durable financial power of attorney, they do revocable living trusts. They do all of these things, and it's absolutely free. If you want to pay some money, you can go to LegalZoom.com, you can go to Mama Bear. There's others out there that you can get these. And so don't tell me, that costs too much, because there's places you can get it for free. Now you do have to be careful if you have a difficult or complicated estate. You should talk to at least a paralegal, that's who I use, or a lawyer, because you don't want a fatal problem in your document, especially if it's complicated. So I'm going to leave you with a couple, at least this verse and then one more. Deuteronomy 8:18. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is this day. You think you're smarter than everybody else because you're wealthy? You're only wealthy because God gave you that wealth. He gave you the ability to use your mind and your work ethic and the things that we're told to do. But you need to remember, everything comes from the Lord. So here's my 6 things. Get a will. Have a revocable living trust. Get your advanced health care completed go to the website. Write out your instruction letter. Make sure your blue box is comprehensive and complete. And then I would really suggest you be generous with God in your estate. Many of you have been generous givers to the church here at Treasure Valley. And praise the Lord for you. It's awesome. You should think about doing the same thing when you die. God gave you everything. So think about being generous to him, who gave you the ability to do it. And keep your life free from the love of money. Be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So even all of this financial money talk, make sure you still have the right perspective about life. Don't spend your life fretting over all of this. These are good things that you can do, and I think they will help you in the long run. All right, that's the end of the formal. I know I had one question over here.
You said on the letter of instruction for, say, like one by remember guns or whatever, that was not legally binding. What's the point?
Well, it's supposed to be like keepsakes and things like that. If you have a gun collection, like Jesse Beck, he had $400,000 worth of guns. That goes in the estate. If you've got one rifle, it's worth $200. I'm not sure you have to keep track of that. And if you gave it to one son over the other son and the other son got mad, your letter of instruction is only your desires and your wishes. Right? It's what you would like happen with that great silver platter. that you own, or that piece of artwork, or maybe a piece of jewelry that isn't worth very much, but to your daughter, you wore it your whole life, and you want to give it to her. You want her to have that. Now, if that piece of jewelry is worth $1 million, well, that's not fair to your other beneficiaries. But if it's not worth a lot of money, like it's a quilt, what are quilts worth? Your executor or your trustee, you don't expect them to go out and sell the quilt and divide it up by 4 and give everybody 25% of that. Maybe you have 4 quilts and you have 4 children. You say, okay, this child gets this quilt and this child gets this quilt. So it's kind of things like that, like a sewing machine that's 30 years old. That's probably a pretty good sewing machine, but it's those things. If things are of value and I put them on my list, then your trustee should handle that. And then they'll decide, do I sell them or do I distribute them out? But technically, he's charged with all your assets and all your liabilities. He's got to take all of those. He's got to pay off the liabilities. What's left over, he distributes. If it's in a will, the state of Idaho gets involved. If it's in a revocable living trust, the state of Idaho does not get involved. That's why I like revocable living trusts. Another question here. So it depends on the, no, it does not. It doesn't get passed on to the children. And then it depends on the size. If you got a lot of assets and a lot of liabilities, then the people with a lot of liabilities, they now have an interest in all your assets. And it could go through a legal process to take care of that. If you die or your parents die and you have $10,000 worth of credit card debt and really no assets, I've helped people just call the credit card companies and say, my dad died, he's not here, there's no money. You can do whatever you want. You can go through whatever administrative process you want to collect on the credit cards, but there's nothing there. I had a good friend that died. He had a Ford F-150. He loved that Ford F-150. The debt on the car was more than the value of the truck. And he had no other assets. And so I told the trustee, I'll take it down to the Ford dealer. And so I took the keys. I drove down to Tuttle Click Ford in Irvine, California. I asked to see the manager. They said, oh, what do you want to see the manager for? I said, well, I'd like to talk to the manager about it. You think that worked? That didn't work too well. I said, okay, do you see that F-150 right out there? There's Ford credit debt on that car, that truck. There's the truck, and here's the keys. It was owned by a friend of mine. He's gone. He had no heirs. He has no money. And I'm at least giving you the courtesy, instead of having to go repossess it and you don't know where it is, it's right there. Oh, we're not taking that. We're not taking that. I said, well, then can I talk to the manager now? And the manager came in, and they took it. I don't know if they took it or not, because I took the keys and I set it on a desk and I said, I really think I'm doing you a favor. I'm sorry if I'm not. And I turned around and I left. But yeah, it doesn't fall on you as a beneficiary. You won't get anything because you got more liabilities than assets, but it doesn't fall on you. So paralegals are expert in the documents.
Right. So what would be
It's a
parameters to bring more help in as far as the complexity of this?
it's a judgmental call. The paralegal I used taught at the UCI law school. She taught all these up-and-coming lawyers how estate planning works and how the documents work. So I found one that was highly recommended. I could pick a number for your estate and say, if it's worth $10 million, you should probably have a lawyer do it. And I don't know where that line is. And I would hate for you to go to a paralegal that's no good. So you would have to do some research on the person and see whether you thought they were competent or not. And you know what? These numbers in California are way bigger than in Idaho. I did some research in Idaho, and these numbers are fairly reasonable. I know it sounds like a lot of money to spend $10,000 for a large, complicated estate, but you only do it once, and amendments are cheaper. But yeah, I can't tell you exactly what it is.
Fairly user-friendly to do it yourself.
Yep. Anybody that does TurboTax, I mean, it's kind of like that. They ask you questions. And those are hard. If you have married children, it gets hard. Let's say I had 2 children and one of my children dies. Where does half of my estate go? Does it go to his wife or does it go to his children? When we're married, we're one in Christ. God sees us as one. But the culture says, no, it doesn't go to the wife. It goes to the kids. Because the wife could remarry. And do you want the wife to have the money in the new marriage and your kids, you know, your grandkids have no money? So there is some reason to put it with the grandkids. So if you've thought through all that and you've read through all that and you found a good paralegal, you should go for that. If you haven't thought through that and you need someone to hold your hand a little bit and say, well, what happens in divorces and what happens in deaths, then it might be worth the money to get some help with a lawyer.
Conversation with my spouse. We have 2 little ones. We're putting together a trust, and we were to pass young. And I don't know the spiritual state or the maturity of my children when they turn 18. What are your thoughts or practical wisdom on when they should actually receive the money?
Right. It's a good question.
Large estate to them at 18.
It's not wise. So this is where a lawyer or even a good paralegal would say, you don't want to leave it to your kid that's 10 because, so someone would have to be a guardian for that. So we did 18, 25, and 30 because we thought, yeah, you know, a lot of wealth for an 18-year-old even could ruin that person. So you can put whatever parameters in you want.
You split it up over 18, 25, and 30, like your estate was released in a certain percentage.
Well, the estate stays in place. If they're a beneficiary, the money stays in the estate until they attain that age. So then the trustee's doing more work, which is why I said they should be paid. And again, back to my comment, if you have unsaved kids, there's still hope for them. So you don't have to write them out, right? You don't have to write them out. But if there's no hope, and you're old like me, and you don't have that much longer to live, maybe, I mean, at some point you have to say, they've shown their background. But yeah, put those in. And you can put whatever you want, because it's your document. You can say, I don't want to get it till 25 or 30. But on the other hand, don't manage your kids when you're gone, right? Don't manage your kids when they're gone. Back here. Yeah. Right. Well, you just tell them it's going to be a mess. As what? Yep. Okay, the question was multiple siblings, multiple states. They don't all have any of these documents. It is true, probate law is state by state. It's state by state. Revocable living trusts are not, because they're good through in any state. Yeah, it's going to get messy because the LLC has some value. So the managers of the LLC, you know, are going to be able to dictate what happens with that LLC. So I think you're just saying, I think the only reasonable argument is it's going to be a mess. And I don't think you want to leave it in a mess. I try to get them to do something, at least a will or a... Okay, well, a will's a legally binding document. And they could the trustee's going to have to add up all of the assets and the values of all the assets and the liabilities, and the trustee is going to make distributions to the beneficiaries. So the power's in the name of the trustee of the estate, and they're going to do whatever the document says to do. And so in that particular case, if it was worth $4 million and you sell everything, you pay off all the liabilities, it's $1 million each, you distribute $1 million to them and let them worry about what it means to them. I wouldn't fret over it, but I'm not a lawyer, I don't practice law, and I'm not an active CPA. Yeah.
So having parents that are getting up in age, how do you go about having a conversation effectively to make sure that they're doing these things or have thought about these things in an efficient manner without being disrespectful?
Well, I think we've seen that just planning well is a good idea in every facet of your life. And you could tell them, I don't know what all the beneficiaries are going to do, and I really don't want to fight with my siblings. Do you want us to fight with our siblings? I know you don't want to do it. Okay, you don't want to do it. Why don't you want to do it? And it costs too much, this or this or this, and you can see that you can find places that it's cheap, relatively inexpensive. I also asked the question, how big is the estate? If the estate's $25,000, then I wouldn't worry about it. Because so what if you don't get a fourth of it or a third of it? Just let it go. If they just don't want to do it, you can't make them do it. Okay, I have to be done, but I will be here. You can come up and talk to me. Thank you for coming. And it's been fun to be with you this morning.